Welcome to the Lore Vault, a quiet corner of the night where stories breathe softly and forgotten truths drift like dust through a half-open window. If you've come seeking gentle lore to fall asleep to, you're in the right place. Tonight, I'll guide you into the silent life of Roboute Guilliman, not the avenging son sung in hymns, but the man who awakened after 10 millennia, bound in gold and burdened by duty. So relax your breathing, let the darkness settle, and follow me into the stillness behind the armor of fate as we begin our quiet descent into his story. Let me take you gently from the stillness of the intro into the quiet heart of tonight's story. Before we unfold the letter he never sent, before we listen to the voice he kept hidden behind gold and duty, we need to understand the man himself as he exists in the silence of the 41st millennium. Roboute Guilliman, a name spoken with reverence across a million worlds, a symbol etched into shrines, banners, cathedrals, and the trembling hopes of humanity. But names change meaning over time, and by the age he returned, Guilliman had become something more myth than memory. To the Imperium, he was a demigod reborn. To the Adeptus Astartes, he was the perfect son returned to lead them. To billions of citizens, he was a living answer to desperate prayers. But what does a legend see when he opens his eyes? When I picture him waking after 10,000 years, I do not see triumph. I do not hear choirs. I imagine confusion, a deep and aching disorientation, the kind that settles into a soul long before the mind can process the moment. Because when Roboute Guilliman died, when Fulgrim's poisoned blade found his throat, the Imperium was still something he recognized. It was fractured, yes, bleeding, yes, but there was clarity, purpose, structure, a dream worth fighting for. What he awakened into was not that dream. And so we begin with a truth often lost beneath the ultramarine blue and gold. And gold? Guilliman did not return to glory. He returned to grief. The Imperium he found was a grotesque reflection of the empire he built. Bureaucracy bloated into madness, religion twisting his father's vision into something unrecognizable, worlds enslaved by fear, not unity, function replaced by fanaticism, strategy replaced by superstition, and threading through every level of the Imperium, a slow, quiet rot. Imagine the pain, not the physical kind, but the sorrow of a builder forced to walk through the ruins of his life's work. That is the first burden he carried. And the second burden is one the galaxy often forgets: loneliness. True loneliness, not the solitude of command, nor the isolation of leadership, those he knew well in the Great Crusade. This was different. This was absolute. Guilliman returned to a universe where his brothers were gone, some dead, some damned, some vanished into myths and warp-stained nightmares. He alone remained, the last loyal son walking the material realm. Every decision he made, every decree he issued, every life that depended on his judgment, all of it was his alone to bear. To the Imperium, he became the Lord Commander. To himself, he became Atlas, condemned to hold up a sky that was already collapsing. And yet, even this is not the deepest wound. To understand that, we must return to the place where everything changed, Thessaly. The battle between Guilliman and Fulgrim has been told 1,000 times across the Imperium. Songs, holos, sermons, they all depict a duel of titans, a clash of demigods. But when you strip away the embellishments, what remains is a tragic truth. It wasn't a duel, it was an execution. Fulgrim's blade did more than cut. It carried a poison shaped from the warp itself, something meant not to kill a body, but to unmake a soul. Guilliman fell not because he was weaker, but because something beyond mortal comprehension reached inside him and tore at the essence of who he was. And then came the real horror. He was placed in stasis. Stasis, in the litanies of the Mechanicus, is a miracle, a way to preserve life. But preservation is not mercy. Preservation is imprisonment. For 10,000 years, Roboute Guilliman did not sleep. He did not rest. He did not slip into darkness or drift into dreams. He remained conscious, caught in the final nanosecond before death, frozen in a moment of agony stretched across millennia, a scream suspended in time, a breath trapped between inhale and exhale. I sometimes imagine what that must have felt like, the way the mind must bend under the pressure, the way memory must fray, the way identity must crumble and reform around the pain of that suspended moment. And yet, he endured. But endurance comes with its price. When he was finally revived, through a desperate alliance between Belisarius' call and the strange biomancy of the Yanari, Guilliman did not rise from the dead whole. He rose wounded. He rose altered. He rose into a universe that needed him more than he could ever need himself. And bound to him was the third burden of his existence, the armor of fate. To many, it is a masterpiece, gold and ceramite, shaped with impossible craftsmanship. To the ecclesiarchy, it is holy. To the Mechanicus, it is genius. But to Guilliman, it is a life support cage. Hundreds of cables pierce his flesh. Neural connectors regulate his movements. Warp scrubbers filter his blood every second, fighting the echo of Fulgrim's poison. The suit breathes for him, moves with him, thinks in fractions of seconds before he can act. He no longer feels the cold, no longer feels warmth, no longer feels the texture of reality. Instead, the machine feels it for him, translating life into data streams. He does not live inside the armor, he floats within it. And a man suspended inside a golden shell, the Imperium worships, while the man himself slowly fades behind layers of sensation, stripped away. This is the reality behind the legend, being a Primarch resurrected not into triumph, but into confinement, a savior kept alive by a machine that steals life even as it preserves it. And so, before we enter the letter, before we listen to the words he never let the galaxy hear, we must carry this understanding. Roboute Guilliman is not a god returned. He is a man trapped between pain and duty, between life and stasis, between destiny and weariness. A man who has seen too much, lost too much, endured too long. And tonight, we are going to step even deeper into that darkness, into the voice he kept hidden, into the truths he never spoke, into the letter he wrote in a silent room at 0300 ship night, with only the echo of his own breath against metal to keep him company. When you're ready, we'll open it. Before we open the letter Guilliman left behind, there is one more descent we must make, a deeper look into the fractures of his story, the parts of his past that shaped not only his suffering, but the strange and fragile shape of his existence now. Because Guilliman is not merely a resurrected Primarch, he is the sum of tragedies that never ended, wounds that never closed, and responsibilities that no human or demigod should ever be asked to bear. Let me bring you closer to the moment his life ceased to be his own. We spoke earlier of Thessala, the place where Guilliman fell. Most imperial accounts shape the duel between him and Fulgrim into a glorious legend, but legends are so often lies, varnished with reverence. The truth underneath is quieter and far crueler. Fulgrim did not strike at Guilliman's armor, he struck at Guilliman's essence. The blade he carried sang with warp corruption, dripping with a poison that understood souls better than flesh. And when it found Guilliman's throat, the cut cleaved more than skin, it severed the thread binding him to life. His blood flowed. His vision dimmed. It, his limbs grew heavy but it was the poison, not the blade, that ended him. The venom of excess ate him from the inside, ignoring every gift the Emperor had infused into his creation. It bypassed the organs meant to regenerate damaged tissue. It slipped past his superhuman resistance to toxins. It crawled into his brain, his nerves, the invisible architecture of who he was. Guilliman, the avenging son, felt himself being unmade. That moment, frozen as it was, became the axis of his existence. Because his death did not end, it was paused. The Mechanicus, desperate, frantic, terrified to lose him, placed him inside a stasis field, a device meant to freeze time, a device never meant to hold a dying Primarch for more than a second. And there, time stopped. Imagine that with me, just for a moment, in the quiet of this night. Guilliman did not drift into unconsciousness. He did not collapse into oblivion. He did not escape the pain of Fulgrim's strike. He remained awake in the tiniest sliver of dying. The moment between the wound and the fall. The moment where breath fails to become sound. The moment thought begins to fade, but cannot fully extinguish. That moment became his eternity. 10,000 years spent suspended in agony, not screaming, not breathing, not dreaming, just existing in the silent cliff edge between life and death, unable to step forward or backward. I sometimes think that this, more than the poison, more than the war, more than the weight of command, is what changed him forever. How could anyone return from such a place unchanged? And then he awoke. But awakening is too gentle a word. He was snatched back into life, pulled from a timeless void into a galaxy unrecognizable from the one he remembered. Call's machines tore the stasis cage open. Yanari energies coaxed the soul back into the wound, and Guilliman gasped as if drawing breath for the first time in a lifetime, because he was. And that breath hurt, and it burned, not just physically, spiritually, because awakening did not erase the trauma of stasis. It magnified it. He rose into a world that worshipped what he used to be. He rose into an empire twisted beyond recognition. He rose inside a body not fully his own, and he rose inside a machine, the armor of fate, and the monument. To the Imperium it is divine. To Call it is a masterpiece. But to Guilliman it is the price of living, a price he never consented to pay. Let me describe it the way the file does, and the way I imagine it in the silence of this narrative. The armor is alive, not in the biological sense, but in the mechanical one. It breathes for him. It filters his blood. It regulates the echo of Fulgrim's poison still trapped inside his throat. It carries his weight and moves with him and responds to neural impulses faster than his flesh can. Inside it, Guilliman exists suspended, neither fully in his body nor free of it. When he reaches for something, a data slate, a relic, a cup, he feels the faintest delay, the briefest ghost of separation between intention and action. The suit moves just ahead of him, as though anticipating his need, as though it knows him more deeply than he knows himself. He is not wearing the armor. He is inside it, cradled by it, dependent on it. And in that dependence lies his fear, and in that the armor is slowly replacing him, claiming his senses, becoming his interface with the world, becoming the barrier between him and humanity. He cannot feel the grain of a wooden desk in Shinkulitekas while Nadutsplain. He cannot feel the cold of recycled air in his ship, and he cannot feel the warmth of a sun or the sting of winter. The armor feels it for him, translating all sensation into sterile data. Cold becomes temperature drop, minor. Warmth becomes thermal shift, positive. Touch becomes pressure, stable. And somewhere underneath all that machinery, a living, breathing man is dissolving. This is the tragedy of Guilliman. The Imperium does not know. He saved the Empire by returning, but salvation demanded a sacrifice greater than his death. It demanded his life, not the beating heart, walking, commanding life that still exists, but the life of sensation, connection, humanity, the life that allows a person to feel the world rather than interpret it through layers of logic and metal. And so he moves through the galaxy like a ghost, haunting his own armor, a warrior suspended in a machine that keeps him upright while slowly eroding everything that makes him mortal. This is why, in the deepest hours of ship night, when the Macragge honor falls silent, Guilliman retreats to his Scriptorium, locks the door, sits alone, and removes the armor piece by piece. Not to rest, not to heal, but to feel the cold air on his skin, and will deracious never the dew, or new mealything pull you, for nan cover for talv but dagger brightler, and little blove you cold have, and what you wedge from cover fairduren on the penter every covers, to feel the weight of metal lifting from his shoulders, to feel the pain of the Thessalan wound flaring up again, reminding him that beneath the machine, beneath the prophecy, beneath the armor, he is still alive, still a man, and that quiet, painful ritual is the pathway to the letter we are soon going to open. A letter written not by a legend, not by a Primarch, but by someone who has been holding the galaxy for far too long and is beginning slowly, silently to crack beneath its weight. In the next part, we will open that letter and listen to everything Roboute Guilliman never meant anyone to hear. Before we step into the letter he never sent, there is one more place I must bring you to. A moment, quiet, fragile, razor thin, where everything that Roboute Guilliman truly is rises to the surface. A moment where the legend falls away and only the man remains. It happens not on the battlefield, nor in the war room, nor beneath the stained glass halls of the Imperial Palace. No, it happens in a room so small, so silent, so unadorned that no one would believe a Primarch sets foot inside. The Scriptorium, a chamber tucked deep within the Macragge's honor. No banners, no guards, no choir, and only darkness, the hum of distant machinery, and the faint metallic breathing of a man who has forgotten what breath is supposed to feel like. This is where Guilliman comes when the weight becomes too much. Tonight, when the gold feels too heavy, when being the god of a dying empire becomes unbearable. This is where the climax begins. He enters slowly, not because he must, but because the armor always requires a moment to adjust. The door seals behind him, and for the first time in days, no eyes are watching him, no advisors, no generals, no servitors cataloging his every movement. Just him and the machine that keeps him alive. And then he begins the ritual. A ritual no one is meant to see. A ritual the Imperium would deny if it ever learned of it. A ritual born not from ceremony, but from desperation. Piece by piece, Guilliman unseals the armor of fate. And the clasps hiss, the maglocks disengage, the neural links retract with a sound like distant static. The metal peels away from his skin, slowly, painfully. The first sensation he feels is weight. Not the weight of the armor, but the weight of himself. The weight his body has forgotten how to carry. When the chest plate opens, cold air rushes against scarred flesh that hasn't touched true temperature in months. The wound on his throat, the wound that never truly healed, throbs as if awakened. It burns bright and sharp, like a blade drawn across the soul. He winces. He imagine that for a moment. A Primarch, a being born from the Emperor's own design, flinching like a wounded mortal. But that wince is precious, and because in that moment Guilliman feels something real. He continues, with shoulder guards fall to the ground with a heavy clang. Arm braces thud beside them. You weren't the reinforced abdominal plating, fused with medical tubing, detaches with a wet snap that draws blood. He doesn't wipe it away. The blood is proof he still has a body beneath the machine. When he finally stands free of the main plates, he is trembling, not from weakness, but from the shock of sensation flooding back into him. The cold bites at him. Air prickles at his skin. Pain radiates through muscle and bone. And tonight to veil belay of the reld well, the saw light your knife, and for a moment he closes his eyes. I imagine this as the single most human thing he experiences. And the simple act of standing unarmored, unguarded, unprotected, in the stillness of an empty room. But the ritual isn't complete. He sits, here, slowly lowering himself onto the cold metal chair, breathing unevenly, the way a mortal might after running too long. His bare feet touch the floor, and he feels the cold travel up his legs. That sensation, that tiny, almost meaningless sensation, grounds him. It reminds him he is not just a symbol, not just a demigod, not just a resurrected artifact of the Imperium. He is alive, painfully, inconveniently, vulnerably alive. And here, in this chair, stripped of the golden cage, Guilliman faces the truth he hides from the galaxy, that the armor of fate does not merely preserve him, it erases him. Every day inside it, he becomes a little less human, a little more detached. And well, Jadal, how sheeple bedding, and first light the tour by their fetter by their a little more like a thinking machine, forced to imitate a man he once was. His senses are filtered, his motions are automated, in that his breath is regulated. His life is interpreted through data pulses rather than nerves. But out here, in the cold, he feels everything: the ache of his wound, the stiffness of forgotten tendons, the tremble of exhaustion that even a Primarch cannot escape forever. And then comes the moment that defines the climax of his tragedy. Guilliman reaches for the last part of the armor still attached, the neck brace that keeps Fulgrim's poison from spreading, the one piece he cannot remove without risking death in minutes. He places his fingers against it, and he hesitates. This not because he is afraid to die. The fear of death is a relic he shed long ago. He hesitates because for a heartbeat, a moment so fleeting, it nearly slips past unnoticed. He considers it. He considers what it would mean to remove that final piece, and to allow the poison to finish what it began 10,000 years ago, to let the weight finally fall from his shoulders. He considers freedom, not the freedom of victory or duty fulfilled, but the freedom of rest, real rest, the kind he has never known. His hand trembles, a Primarch's hand, a godlike being, a titan of the Imperium, trembling, but he does not remove it. And he releases a slow breath, and the moment fades, a tiny fracture sealed once more beneath millennia of discipline. He sits back, exhausted not by battle, but by the endless burden of continuing. And in that exhaustion, he does something he never allows himself to do. He sleeps. Well, not deeply, not peacefully, well, not for long, but he sleeps, armor beside him, wound pulsing, body aching, soul heavy. For a few minutes, brief, fragile, stolen, Roboute Guilliman is not a Primarch, not a lord, not a savior, not a symbol, and he is simply a man who is tired. And it is inside this moment, this quiet, painful human moment, that the letter begins. The letter he wrote when the armor was off, the poison burned, and the weight felt unbearable. The letter no one was ever meant to see. The letter we open next. The chronometrics read Bow 0312 ship time. Yuri Semide. I can hear the Macragge's honor breathing around me, the distant pulse of reactors, the faint tremor of void shield harmonics, the slow cycling of recycled air drawn through metal lungs. These sounds accompany me more faithfully than any living soul ever has. Yet tonight, even they feel distant. Perhaps that is why I write. Perhaps it is the silence between those sounds that finally presses too closely to ignore. I have spent the last hour removing my armor. Not all of it. That luxury is never fully mine, but enough for the cold to touch me, enough for the pain in my throat to return like an old memory, enough to remember that beneath the ceramite and gold I am made of flesh that still protests its survival. The pain is grounding in its own strange way. That is why I allow it. That is why I am writing this now. I do not expect anyone to read these words. In truth, I do not want anyone to. I am not sure what part of me this letter belongs to, and only that I needed a place, any place, where I could speak without being observed, where I could be Roboute, God, not Lord Commander, not Primarch returned, not Avenging Sun, just Roboute, a title the galaxy has little use for. I sit now at my desk, though desk is a generous term. It is metal, cold, utilitarian, a construction meant for function, not comfort. The surface is bare except for a single lumen lamp, and the thin sheet of parchment Cole insisted I keep on hand for analog expression of thought. He said it would help regulate neural tension. I wonder if even he realizes the irony of prescribing humanity to a man he rebuilt as a machine. The lamp flickers. Or perhaps that is merely my perception, distorted through fatigue. I find myself uncertain more often these days. There is a disconnect that widens slowly, subtly, like a hairline fracture in the surface of glass, spreading with each passing hour. The armor of fate interprets what I see, what I hear, what I feel. It derives conclusions in fractions of a second, feeding them back through neural synapses. Call has reinforced so many times that I no longer remember their original shape. That is why I must remove the armor before I write. Why I must feel the cold of this room as it truly is, not as the suit interprets it. Why I must let the wound on my throat throb unfiltered. Pain reminds me I am not entirely artificial. Not yet. Even now, as I flex my fingers, I can feel the stiffness in the joints, not mechanical, but biological. Tendons that once moved with perfect precision now require effort. My muscles complain. There is a faint tremor in my left hand. The suit hides these symptoms, compensates instantly, but stripped of it, I see the truth I keep concealed beneath gold. I am not whole, not restored, not redeemed, merely sustained. If the galaxy knew how fragile this body truly is, how delicately it is kept from collapse by a lattice of machinery and xenotech, I wonder whether they would still look upon me with reverence, or whether they would finally understand the hollowness I carry. But these thoughts are not for them. They are not for anyone. They are for this page, and for whatever shred of myself still lingers inside this reconstructed flesh. I did not think I would ever write something like this. During the Great Crusade, my words were declarations, strategic forecasts, policy reforms, visions crafted to build a future worth living in. I wrote with purpose, with clarity, with ambition. What purpose does this letter serve? What clarity remains? What future is there to build in an Imperium that worships the ashes of its past? When I walk the halls of the Imperial Palace, when I listen to the Administratum argue over semantics while whole sectors burn, when I look at the Ecclesiarchy's icons shaped in the likeness of my father, a likeness they no longer understand, I feel the full scope of my failure, not as a commander, not as a demigod. As a man, it would be easy to hide that truth, easier still to bury it beneath duty. But something in me refuses, something small, something fragile, something that survived the poison, the stasis, the resurrection, and the armor of fate. A remnant of the man I was before the galaxy demanded I become something else. That remnant is why I write. I write because I can feel myself slipping, because each day the armor interprets more of the world for me, because each night the silence grows deeper, because each morning the weight of the Imperium feels more unbearable. There are moments, fleeting ones, when I cannot tell whether I am the one moving my body or whether the suit is anticipating motions I have not yet consciously chosen. Moments where my reflection looks unfamiliar. Moments where I feel like an echo shaped in my own image. And in those moments, a thought returns. If I do not hold on to myself, and who will? This letter may be the only place where I can still speak as Roboute Guilliman, son of the Emperor, child of Macragge, builder of worlds, not the hollow icon the Imperium clings to. If you, whoever you are, ever read these words, I ask only that you understand one thing. I am trying to be a symbol, trying to lead, trying to endure, trying to remain myself. But even the strongest structures crack, even mountains erode, even primarchs grow tired. Tonight, in this quiet room, with the armor at my feet and the cold air stinging my throat, I feel the full shape of that exhaustion. I feel the weight of years that refuse to rest. And though the galaxy will never hear these words, I needed to write them, not as confession, not as surrender, but as proof to myself more than anyone that I still exist beneath the machine. Roboute Guilliman, Guilliman, Guilliman. If these words are ever uncovered, I suspect they will be mistaken for weakness, perhaps even treason, but I no longer possess the energy to reshape my truth into something more palatable. Tonight, I can only write what is real. And the first truth is this: I do not recognize the man I have become. It is a strange thing to feel like a stranger within your own flesh, to move through the world with the certainty of action, yet without the sense of identity that once anchored every decision. I remember the clarity I used to possess, not only in thought, but in purpose. Every breath of the Great Crusade was guided by conviction. Every step was taken with unwavering direction. I built worlds with my hands and carried ideals in my heart that felt as solid as ceramite. Now I feel hollow, not empty. Hollowness is something else entirely. It is the sensation of remembering fullness and feeling its absence like a phantom limb. I did not notice it at first. In the early days of my resurrection, my mind was too clouded by the shock of awakening. The galaxy was loud, unbearably loud, with cries for guidance, for judgment, for salvation. I had little room to feel anything beyond the urgency forced upon me. But as the noise settled, as the days stretched into weeks and months, the fracture inside me widened. The man who wakes each morning in the armor of fate is not the man who fell at Thessala. Which brings me to the second truth, the one I have tried for months to silence. Thessala did not end when the poison entered my veins. It followed me. It still follows me, not in the physical sense. The wound throbs, yes, but pain alone cannot explain the shadow that lingers. It is the memory, no, the imprint of that moment that has embedded itself into the architecture of my mind. I remember Fulgrim's eyes too clearly, the cruel delight in them, the twisted beauty of the creature he had become. I remember the world dimming, the sensation of my body collapsing, the knowledge that I had been defeated in a way no war could avenge, and then the stasis. So I have written of it briefly, but words are pale instruments for describing something so all-consuming. How do I explain the torment of existing in a moment that never ends? How do I describe agony stretched thin across 10,000 years of silence? How do I confess that even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel time hesitate as if considering trapping me again? There are nights when I jolt awake, not because of nightmares. Nightmares would be a mercy, but because my mind believes it is still frozen, still caught between death and nothingness, still unable to move, to scream, to breathe. I wonder if some fragment of me died in that moment after all, or perhaps a fragment stayed behind, still trapped in that frozen second, waiting for a release that will never come. And so I walk through life with the awareness that part of me has never left the battlefield, never left the moment Fulgrim's blade severed more than flesh. Part of me is perpetually dying, even as the rest of me pretends to lead an empire. Which brings me to another truth, one I speak with a heaviness no armor can conceal. I am alone. This is not the solitude of command, nor the isolation of leadership. I knew those well in life. This is something deeper, colder, a solitude carved by time itself. My brothers are gone, dead, damned, disappeared, or changed beyond recognition. The Imperium I once built has been devoured by zealotry. I walk its halls like a ghost haunting the remnants of a dream I can no longer resurrect. People kneel when I pass, but reverence is not companionship. Billions chant my name, but worship is not understanding. Every world looks to me for salvation, yet none knows who I truly am. Sometimes I fear there is no longer a who to know. The Mechanicus see me as a subject of study, a living relic to be preserved. The Ecclesiarchy see me as a symbol, something to be placed on a pedestal. The High Lords see me as a tool, something to be wielded for their survival. No one sees me as a man. Perhaps this is my greatest failure, that I once dreamed of elevating humanity, only to return and find myself elevated beyond it, stripped of the simple connections that allow one to feel alive. And in the absence of connection, memory becomes a prison. I remember Macragge as it was, sunlit, disciplined, thriving. I remember the warmth of camaraderie with my sons. I remember strategy councils filled with debate, not dogma, and gap. I remember the Emperor's vision, flawed, yes, but rooted in aspiration, not stagnation. But the Imperium I see now is not the Imperium I fought for. It is a corpse animated by fear, a kingdom of candles pretending to be a star. And every day I am expected to hold it upright. That expectation tightens around me like a chain, not because I cannot bear the weight, I can and I will, but because it cost me pieces of myself each time I lift it. This is the truth behind the surface. I lead out of necessity, not desire. I endure because I cannot allow myself to do otherwise. The galaxy thinks me unbroken, but I know better. I know the fractures within. I feel them widen each time I speak with calculated calm. Each time I look into the eyes of my sons and pretend to be the father they remember. Each time I stand before the Imperium and let them believe I have returned whole. The truth is that I am held together by discipline and momentum, nothing more. And though I continue to walk, to speak, to command, there is a quiet dread growing behind every breath, that one day the armor will be all that remains, that one day the man who writes these words will vanish beneath the machine that carries him. And so I write this letter as a tether, a reminder, a desperate anchor to the self. I am terrified of losing, because if I do not hold onto these truths, the Imperium will erase them for me, and the man within the legend will disappear. There is a truth I have avoided writing until now, not because it is the darkest, but because it frightens me with its simplicity. It is easy to speak of loneliness, easy to speak of duty and grief and the consequences of survival. Those are burdens the galaxy expects a Primarch to endure. And but what I am about to confess, no one would expect, no one would accept, and perhaps that is why it weighs on me more heavily than all the others. The truth is this: I am no longer certain where the armor ends and where I begin. At first, it was only a subtle thing, a delay in sensation, a faint distortion in how the world sounded. The armor of fate compensated for my weak points, supported my movements, regulated my breathing, filtered toxins that still lurk in my veins. I was grateful for it, alive because of it. Boost. But gratitude has slowly given way to unease. Each day, the suit takes more initiative. Each day, it anticipates more motion. Each day, it corrects more of me. There are moments, brief but unmistakable, when I feel as though the suit is the one walking, and I am merely suspended inside it, like a passenger in my own body. I extend my arm, the armor moves first. I turn my head, the sensors pivot before my neck does. I inhale, the respirators decide how deeply. The most unsettling is my heartbeat. Sometimes I do not feel it, not because it isn't there, but because the armor's pulse overrides my own. When I stand in council chambers, surrounded by generals and priests who look to me as if I were some resurrected avatar of divine will, I feel a disconnect, the sensation of an actor playing a role within a shell of gold and ceramite, a shell that fits more tightly every day. I fear this feeling, though fear itself has become muted, filtered like everything else. Which leads me to the second truth I have never voiced. I no longer feel the world as it truly is. I feel its translation, and the armor converts reality into streams of information before they reach my nerves. Cold becomes a numerical value. Warmth becomes a tolerable threshold. Pain becomes a color-coded warning. There is no breeze, no scent of the void, no sensation of metal beneath my fingertips. Only data, only interpretation, and only the illusion of contact. Do you understand what that means? How profoundly that shapes a mind. I am alive but through a filter, experiencing the galaxy not as a human, but as something simulated, reconstructed, approximated. Losing one sense is tragedy. Losing all sensation is erasure. And yet, the galaxy believes me restored. But restoration is not what happened. Resurrection is not what happened. I was reassembled. A truth I can barely write. Which brings me to the third confession, the most intimate of them all. I sometimes feel more machine than man, not because the armor makes me strong, but because it makes me distant, removed, separated from sensation, from warmth, from pain, from connection. Even my voice no longer sounds like my own unless the armor is removed. It resonates through vocal filters, harmonic adjusters, stabilizers. I speak, but I do not hear myself. I hear the machine. Good. And in that dissonance, I feel something I have no language for. A slow slipping, a gentle unmaking, that as though the remnants of my humanity are being filed away, layer by layer. There are times late at night when I feel my fingers, my limbs, my breath lag behind the armor's motions like an echo following a sound. And in those moments, I fear that if the armor were ever removed entirely, I might collapse like an empty vessel. Or worse, I might discover there is less of me left than I wish to believe. This is why I perform the ritual. You must understand this. Once every cycle, sometimes more, when the weight becomes unbearable, I lock myself away in the Scriptorium and begin dismantling the armor piece by piece. It is excruciating. The neural plugs cling like roots, the medical cables tear at flesh, and the stabilizers scream warnings. The throat brace burns with a pain that radiates down my spine. But I persist. Where I persist because pain, at least, is real. When the cold air touches my skin, it hurts. When the Thessalon wound pulses, it hurts. When my muscles tremble beneath their own weight, it hurts. And in that hurt, I feel alive. I cling to that pain like a drowning man clings to air, because without it, I feel nothing but the cold logic of the machine. When I sit bare, vulnerable, exhausted in that metal chair, with armor scattered like fallen statues around me, I feel the closest thing to humanity I have left. Pain, cold, pure weakness, and the no in the finure handbraid to be taken Herve don't pay, the tremble of living flesh. They remind me of who I was. They remind me that I still exist. They remind me that beneath the prophecy, beneath the duty, beneath the machinery, there is still a man in here somewhere, a fading man, from a fragment, but still here. And yet, and yet, and this is the darkest truth of layer 2. Each time I put the armor back on, it feels harder to remove, as if the suit is tightening its claim, as if my body grows more dependent on it, as if the lines between us blur more with each passing day. I am terrified, not of dying, but of becoming something that cannot feel death at all. That is what I fear more than Fulgrim, more than the warp, more than the slow collapse of the Imperium, the loss of the self, the loss of humanity, the loss of Roboute Guilliman. I do not know how much of him remains, but this letter, these words, have as these words I resuage the becateners all of the chates, are my attempt to hold on to that final shard before it slips beyond reach. There is one last truth I have avoided writing, not because it is the darkest, but because it is the most absolute, the kind of truth that sits beneath all others, quiet and immutable, waiting for the moment when every distraction falls away. I have circled around it for months, perhaps years, unwilling to face it fully. But now, with the armor lying silent beside me and the night pressing gently against the walls of this chamber, I find myself with no place left to hide. And so here it is, David's. I am afraid that my survival is not a blessing, but a sentence. Not a sentence I chose, nor one I can appeal, nor one given by any court. It is a sentence written into the architecture of the Imperium itself, a galaxy that clings to me, not out of love or reverence, but out of desperation. The truth is, I was not brought back to live. I was brought back to function, I see it in the way the High Lords look at me, with calculations hiding behind their bows. I see it in the way the ecclesiarchy wraps me in dogma, eager to turn my existence into scripture. I see it in the way the mechanicus whispers my vitals like a litany, as though watching a failing machine in need of maintenance. But most of all, I feel it in the armor of fate, in the way it clings, tightens, supports, compensates, consumes. Every day, I feel myself becoming less of a man and more of a mechanism, a necessary cog in a broken empire that has mistaken survival for divinity. And the empire will not let me stop, for it cannot let me stop. Ending myself would not be an escape, it would be abandonment, a betrayal of billions. And more duty chains me, expectation cages me, prophecy hangs above me like a blade. Which brings me to the second truth, the truth I hesitate even to write. I am not afraid of death. I am afraid that death will never come. For 10,000 years, I hovered in a moment that refused to end. I felt the world around me frozen in the heartbeat before oblivion. I felt myself dissolving, mind fraying, soul flickering, body stiffening, but never allowed to cross the threshold. That moment lingers in me still. It whispers when I try to rest. Renat. It shivers down my spine when the armor seals around my throat. It gnaws at the edges of every breath I take. The Imperium sees my return as a miracle, but to me, it feels like a continuation of that stasis. A new form of suspension, stretched not across seconds, but across centuries. A life held in place by necessity instead of mercy. A body held upright by machinery instead of will. A soul held captive by prophecy instead of purpose. Sometimes I wonder, can if the armor of fate were ever removed, would I truly collapse? But or would I simply fall back into that frozen moment, trapped again in a death that refuses to complete? These are the questions that haunt me, questions I cannot voice, questions I fear will one day become answers. There is yet another truth, the one I have swallowed again and again, hoping it will dissolve. It has not. I envy humanity, their fragility, their short lives, will their moments of joy, unburdened by destiny, their ability to feel the world directly, cold and warmth, sorrow and comfort, pain and love. I watch them grow old, and I watch them die, and in their endings I see dignity, a full stop, a completion, to a peace denied to me. I envy the simplicity of a mortal death, a final breath taken willingly or unwillingly, but taken nonetheless. What is eternity worth if it erodes the self? I do not wish for oblivion, not truly, not in the way a despairing man seeks escape. What I wish for is rest, a moment where I am allowed to lay down the weight, a moment where I can exist without the armor, without the fear, without being needed, a moment where I can simply be, not a savior, not a symbol, and unaware, not a son of the emperor, just Roboute. I do not know if such a moment will ever come. Perhaps I have lived too long. Perhaps I have become too intertwined with the destiny of an empire that refuses to let me go. Perhaps the man I wish to be is already gone, dispersed into centuries of duty and loss. But even if that is true, I cling to this final truth. I want my ending to be my own, and not dictated by prophecy, not orchestrated by the high lords, not preserved endlessly by machines that mistake survival for purpose. I want the right to finish my story, to bring it to a close with dignity, to rest where I choose. Pure fantasy for van oping, pure fanis, and wire live deepy, pure fanis, pure fanis, pure fanis, pure sea. Whether on Macragg's soil, beneath the stars I helped reclaim, or in the quiet void beyond all wars. Whether or not I will ever be granted that ending, I cannot know. But writing these words is my act of defiance, my final insistence that I am not merely a mechanism functioning inside a golden shell. I am still a man, a weary, fractured, fading man, but a man nonetheless. If this letter is ever read, let it be known that beneath every command, beneath every victory, beneath every expectation laid upon my shoulders, there existed a soul longing for rest. And that, above all else, is the truth I never dared speak. The lumen is dimming. I can see its light wavering at the edge of the desk, flickering like a candle struggling against a draft no one else can feel. Perhaps it senses what I am writing. Perhaps it knows this is the closest I have come in a very long time to honesty. I should bring this letter to an end, not because I have said all there is to say, but because any more might become something that even I cannot face. There are depths in one's own mind that must be acknowledged carefully as though stepping onto thin ice. I believe I have reached that point. Still, before I close this page, there are a few truths I must gather together, quietly, gently, so that they do not scatter when I rise again to meet the expectations of a galaxy. For all that I have written, the armor still lies beside me, silent, waiting. A golden cage, a life support system, a throne, a prison. It gleams even without power, as if mocking the fragile flesh it is meant to protect. Somewhere within its framework, servos are cooling, whispering faint metallic sighs. They remind me subtly, insistently, that soon I will have to step back inside. The Imperium does not wait, it does not pause, not even for a man who has bared his soul to parchment. I run my fingers across one of the disconnected plates. It feels colder now, not with the clinical neutrality of the data stream the suit would provide, but with the true bite of metal that has been untouched by warmth for too long. It grounds me, in a strange way, a reminder that there is a physical world beneath the layers of interpretation the suit creates. If I close my eyes, I can imagine that this cold is winter on Macragge, the bite of wind across a cliffside, the sting of snow settling into my hair, the raw purity of a world that still belonged to nature, not machinery. But when I open them, I am here in silence, surrounded by metal, kept alive by artifice. That is what this letter must capture. A moment untouched by the expectations placed upon a resurrected symbol. A moment of truth. A moment of quiet. A moment of myself. I do not know how much of that self remains. I do not know how much the armor has replaced or will replace in the years to come. I only know that the parts of me capable of reflection, regret, hope, fear, they are still present, however faded. And perhaps that is enough. This letter is not a rebellion, not an accusation, not even a plea. It is a reminder to me and to whatever future may discover these words that I existed beyond the machinery, that, beneath everything I was forced to become, there was still a pulse of humanity struggling to survive. I do not wish for this humanity to be glorified, nor for it to be mourned, there, only for it to be witnessed once, because so much of my life now happens behind sealed armor, quiet hallways, shuttered chambers, moments hidden so deeply that even I sometimes forget they occur. The Imperium sees a golden warrior, but the gold is thin. Beneath it lie the cracks no one chooses to notice. If this letter does anything, let it be this. Let it testify that I tried to stay whole, tried to stay human, tried to bear the weight without letting it crush the man beneath the symbol. And though I have failed in many ways, I have not stopped trying. Not yet. Well, outside this chamber, heroes and zealots wait for me. Generals wait for orders. Priests wait for miracles. The galaxy waits for stability that it believes only I can provide. But for these few hours, the galaxy has waited. The armor has waited. Duty has waited. And I have allowed myself something fragile, a breath of truth. The lumen flickers again. Its light is nearly gone. Now, so is the warmth in my hands. I think it is time to gather the armor, time to reattach the cables, time to let the machine breathe for me again, time to resume the role carved for me by necessity, not desire. But before I rise, let me leave one final thought, the last truth I can offer. If I must continue, pure fan at spite, if I must walk this path until prophecy or chance permits an end, then let it be known that I walked it with awareness, and that I saw the cost, that I felt the weight, that I carried the empire not because I believed I must, but because I believed no one else should bear it alone. If these words survive me, they are yours now, as witness, as memory, as quiet testament to a man hidden inside a legend. I do not know who you are. I do not know your century, your world, your burden. But if you find this letter, and if it brings you even a moment of understanding, then perhaps there is meaning left in me yet. The lamp fades. My breath grows steady. And for the last time tonight, I sign not as a Primarch, not as a savior, the deep rosed for, but not as a symbol, but as the man who still lives beneath all of it, Roboute Guilliman. I want to take a moment with you now, a slow, quiet breath between the pages we've uncovered before we close this vault for the night. What we just read wasn't simply a letter. It was the interior map of a man the Imperium insists is unbreakable, a man encased in gold, carrying an empire on his shoulders, worshipped by billions who believe he is something more than mortal. But here, in the hush of our midnight space, we saw something entirely different. We saw the trembling outline of humanity, trying desperately not to disappear. There are three things the letter reveals, not as separate ideas, but as layers of the same wound. The first is identity. For all his titles and grandeur, Guilliman does not know who he is anymore. Not as a warrior, not as a Primarch, not as a son, not as a leader. His resurrection tore him out of the timeline he understood, and the Imperium he returned to is one that no longer reflects anything he built. That disorientation is not a simple confusion, it is existential dislocation. A man who once defined civilizations now struggles to define himself. He walks in a future that twisted his past into dogma. He sees his own teachings fossilized into superstition. He looks at statues of himself built by people who never knew him. And worst of all, he must live as the symbol they demand, not as the person he remembers being. This is why his letter feels fractured, not because his thoughts are chaotic, but because his sense of self is in pieces. A man cannot speak in a single voice when he no longer knows which voice is truly his. The second revelation is the erosion of sensation, and with it, the erosion of humanity. The armor of fate is simultaneously miracle and prison, a machine that keeps him alive, yes, but at the cost of every sensory connection that makes life meaningful. He cannot feel cold without removing it, and he cannot feel warmth. He cannot feel touch. He cannot feel his own heartbeat without the machinery interpreting it. The tragedy is subtle but immense, and then Longra. Guilliman isn't simply separated from the galaxy. He is separated from the experience of being alive. His entire reality is filtered, processed, translated into data. He sees the world not through eyes, but through sensors. He hears not with his ears, but with auditory calibrators. He breathes because the suit tells him how, and within that distance, humanity doesn't vanish suddenly. It fades. A medic slowly, quietly, piece by piece. When he removes the armor, he does not do it for freedom. He does it to make sure the man inside still exists. Pain is not suffering for him, and pain is assurance. Pain is proof there's still something beneath the machine. There is something profoundly haunting in that. A primarch, a demigod, needing pain to feel alive. The third revelation, the deepest of them all, is his fear of eternity. Not the poetic kind, not the heroic abstraction of a warrior refusing to die. No, Guilliman fears eternity because he has already lived a version of it. 10,000 years trapped in a dying second. 10,000 years, conscious, suspended in timeless agony. 10,000 years in a moment that refused to end. When he writes about that moment, the words tremble and grind, not literally, but the way thoughts waver when a memory digs its claws too deep. It explains everything. Why he sees survival not as victory, but as punishment. Why rest feels unreachable. Why continuation feels mechanical rather than chosen. Why resurrection feels like a second imprisonment rather than liberation. To the Imperium, Guilliman's endurance is miraculous. To Guilliman, endurance is the one thing he cannot escape. That is the heartbreak hidden between every line of the letter. He does not want to die. He wants to be allowed to stop, to rest, to exhale, need to be a man for even one moment instead of a symbol, and the galaxy will never let him. What makes this letter so devastating is not its sorrow, but its clarity. Guilliman understands his place in the Imperium better than anyone. He is the rational mind forced into the role of a god in a society that worships delusions. He is the only individual with the will to lead an empire that has become too large for any mortal to comprehend. But even clarity can become a burden. He knows he cannot step away. He knows he cannot falter. He knows billions depend on him, He knows the machinery of the Imperium would collapse without his hand to steady it. Duty does not uplift him, it consumes him. Expectation does not empower him, it cages him. Prophecy does not guide him, it imprisons him. And yet, still, he continues, not out of faith, not out of destiny, not out of belief in himself. He continues because he will not allow others to bear the suffering he shoulders. It is a kind of love, unsentimental, unspoken, austere, the kind that holds a galaxy together even as it breaks its bearer from the inside. So, what does this letter mean? It means the Imperium's brightest strategist is quietly unraveling. It means the galaxy's greatest hope yearns for a humanity it keeps taking from him. It means that even the strongest figures in all the stars have a point where endurance feels like erosion. But more than anything, it means this: the man inside the armor is still there, still fighting, still feeling, still longing, still trying desperately not to disappear beneath the gold. And in the hush of this night, with all noise stripped away, that persistence feels more heroic than any war he has ever won. The Imperium worships the symbol, but the galaxy survives because of the man. And as we close this part of the vault, we carry that quiet truth with us into the darkness. In the quiet after everything we've uncovered, Guilliman's solitude lingers, heavy but unwavering. I still see him in that dim scriptorium, surrounded by the soft glow of machines breathing for him, a titan holding the galaxy together, even as he quietly unravels. And if even he can grow tired, then you too are allowed to rest, allowed to exhale, allowed to be soft for a moment. So close your eyes, let the night settle gently around you, and drift into Sleepy Hollow, where even the weary find their sleep.